The Farlands, Minecraft's most legendary glitch. They aren't some imaginative fiction. They're real, and they're forbidden. How were they created, and what nefarious creatures dwell there? This is the story of Minecraft's Farlands. It all began centuries ago, when simple hunter-gatherers roamed the land, struggling to protect themselves from the beasts of Minecraftia. It was in this early and delicate time when a disturbance began rippling across the land. Tectonic plates shifted and ground against each other, controlled by the mysterious force we now know as Farlands noise. It went unnoticed by most of the world's early dwellers, but not by young Joshua Stone. While his tribesmen were focused on what animals they could hunt for dinner, Joshua sensed the Farlands noise gradually shifting the ground beneath his feet, one grain of sand at a time. He excitedly ran to his mother, telling her that he had found his calling.
Mama, I want to study the ground.
She told him that there were more important things to worry about than the earth they walked on. In her mind, the ground was the least of their worries. But Joshua was not to be deterred. Years passed, and as Joshua grew into a man, the world too was changing. Deep under the oceans, fissures began to form. Wind-whipped mountain peaks grew taller. Deserts stretched wider, and forests shook as the ground beneath them rumbled. While his tribesmen were busy building the first green-top houses, Joshua focused on his connection with the earth and the Farlands noise that shaped it, though no one around him seemed to approve.
Listen, you have to talk some sense into your son.
His beloved mother urged him to take up farming so he could contribute to the tribe while still working with the earth. Though they were as close as a mother and son could be, Joshua's decisions caused tension in their relationship. Throughout his life, he had felt that something deep in the earth was growing increasingly tense, like a rubber band stretched to the breaking point. He wondered how his tribesmen could venture into caves, creating mine shafts and tearing the earth apart, when it threatened to swallow them whole. One day, an argument broke out between Joshua and the tribe's leader. Joshua pleaded that they move their camp elsewhere because he could feel that something catastrophic was going to happen here.
You don't understand! The earth is unstable!
The tribe's leader would hear none of it, calling him lazy for simply walking around with his ear to the ground day in and day out, while the rest of them slaved to earn a living. There was nothing Joshua could do to change his mind, so he turned to his mother, begging her to leave the tribe with him. How did he expect them to survive, she asked him. He wasn't a farmer or a hunter, couldn't build his own shelter or craft any tools. Joshua realized that he had depended on his tribe for survival his whole life, but he swore he could learn to make it on his own. When his mother refused, his desperation erupted into anger, and at the very same moment, a ravine fractured the earth beneath his feet with a thundering crack. Joshua scrambled to the side, but his mother wasn't so lucky. Her scream echoed off the ravine's stone walls and pierced her son's heart. The next few moments felt like an eternity to Joshua. He walked right out of the tribe's camp without looking back, without even noticing that 3 other tribesmen had also fallen to their deaths. All he could do was move away from the people who he blamed for his mother's premature and painful demise. Before long, night had fallen, and Joshua was alone for the first time in his life. Though he hadn't done any of the work himself, he had seen the craftsmen in his tribe chop trees down and turn them into crafting tables, whittle the wood into sticks, and craft tools. His knuckles bled from punching trees, but the pain he felt inside was stronger. Tears blurred his vision as he fled from zombies, dug a small shelter in a hill, and hid for the night. He continued scraping by, day after day. His hunger drove him to butcher animals for food, and he found that the violence helped soothe his aching heart. Desiring a greater challenge, he turned to hunting monsters at night, and as the days stretched into years, Joshua became a nocturnal creature. He couldn't be bothered with farm animals anymore. He craved a fight, something that would punch him back. So he only ate rotten flesh. It burned with every swallow, but he didn't care. His grief evolved into anger, and he began to hear the Farlands noise calling to him, beckoning him to more distant lands.
Fine. I don't have anything keeping me here anyway.
He traveled on foot for years, journeying beyond the reaches of the growing villages he had forsaken. He fought his way through jungles, climbed mountains, and skirted the edges of ravines just like the one he'd nearly fallen into so long ago. His anger, his diet of rotten flesh, and his stubborn fixation on the Earth's vibrations slowly transformed him into a creature he didn't recognize. His humanity began to peel away from him, like his dirty, tattered robes. Eventually, he sensed that he had reached the place that the Perlin noise was guiding him to. All Joshua had to do was stand there to know that this was where the noise was the strongest. He felt the ground churning beneath him, and decided to wait for whatever the land wanted to present to him. He built a crude shelter, his mind swimming with the earth's voices. Over the course of several years, the grass became speckled with redstone ore, which Joshua mined. He experimented with this new material, grateful to the noise for its gift, and found that it had the capacity to generate and carry energy. He created extensive circuits and contraptions, amazed by what redstone could do, but the noise whispered that this was only the beginning. With the redstone, Joshua noticed that the voice of the Perlin noise was clearer to him than ever before, their connection strengthened by this rare earth mineral. He began a new string of experiments to see if he could communicate a message back to the noise, and after several years, he succeeded. By then, Joshua had become a man possessed. He and the noise communicated with each other, and Joshua learned that he had a critical role to play in its plan.
Yes! Yes! Right away!
He built a massive network of redstone torches, connecting them with redstone dust, running miles each day to do as the noise commanded. One day, he was hurrying from one torch to another when he suddenly appeared at his destination. This teleportation ability frightened Joshua at first, worsening the emotional storm churning within him. It meant that the noise thought he wasn't working fast enough. He zipped across the land, and within a few months, his creation was complete. The Perlin noise hummed, pleased with his work. Joshua didn't need it to tell him what the final step was. They had had the same goal all along. Joshua raised his redstone torches, commanding the land to fracture itself. With a deep, thundering crack, the earth obeyed. Towering cliffs rose out of the ground, punctured with holes like Swiss cheese. The noise screeched in Joshua's mind. He was going too fast, but Joshua stood steadfast. He would not allow his creation to be made at the crawling pace of geological movement. For the first time, the Perlin noise was forced to obey Joshua, and the cliffs rose even higher. Earthquakes moved like waves across the world, shaking villages thousands of miles away. Finally, when the sky was blocked by the massive walls, Joshua relented. Here, in the Farlands, he could hide from the world, never to be disturbed by men again. Or so he thought. Rumors spread across the world as villagers speculated about what had caused the massive earthquakes. Bold adventurers set out to find answers, hopeful that they could harness whatever power source had been able to shake the world. All of these ventures ended in disaster, because outside the safety of their tribes, these villagers were ill-equipped for survival.
There are too many of them! Retreat!
They were forced to abandon their adventures and stay within the confines of their villages. Stories about the Great Tremors were passed down through generations, and as civilization advanced, so did their thirst for knowledge. Men went on expeditions into the wilderness and survived to tell the rest of the villagers what was out there. Emboldened, some of them went on the long quest their ancestors had, trying to find the source of the massive earthquakes. Many failed to journey over the thousands of miles that separated them from the Farlands. But one day, Joshua saw a caravan of villagers approaching his sanctuary.
I should have known this day would come.
He'd lived for centuries in peace, shielding himself from death with the power of the Perlin noise. His stride had gained an unnatural speed, and he had killed thousands of zombies with his weapon of choice, an axe. Time had allowed him to shed his former identity, and now he thought of himself only as the Farlands man. As he watched the intruders approach, he knew this era of solitude was over and was filled with rage. He plotted to wait for them among the cliffs he knew so well, and with this home field advantage, he would strike. Below, the villagers were ecstatic over their discovery and built a staircase to scale the massive wall. From the top, they stood in awe of the view, and they celebrated the greatest discovery of their lives. The smooth cliff faces were unlike anything they'd ever seen before, and were certainly not formed naturally. Night fell, and while the villagers made plans to find out how the Farlands were created, a voice slithered towards them.
Turn around.
The villagers locked eyes, frozen with fear. The voice repeated itself, "Turn around." Slowly, one villager turned to see the terrifying face of the Farlands man. He was barely able to let out a scream before the man closed the distance between them and sent him careening off the cliff's edge with a rough swipe of his axe. The remaining villagers drew their swords, but it was too late. The man swung his weapon, ruthlessly chopping the intruders to pieces. Satisfied, he withdrew into the cliff's caverns. The man hoped he would remain undisturbed afterward, but over the years, more and more villagers found their way to the Farlands. Each group failed to be deterred by the ominous abandoned staircase left behind by the first group of villagers, so the man had no choice but to dispose of them in his violent ways. Decades passed, and the lingering spirits of those slaughtered villagers crowded the cliffs, their wails echoing off the cavern walls. Each new villager that arrived felt the ghost trying to send them away, shuffling their inventories to scare them, but failed to heed their warning. Dozens of villagers suffered the same gruesome fate. Among these spirits, one truth was known: the Farlands man never left any survivors. Another century passed before a villager named Tommy Stone arrived at the base of the cliffs. His reason for coming here was different. While most villagers craved honor and heroism, Tommy was called here by a faint whisper in the back of his mind. So instead of climbing to the top of the cliffs as the others before him had, Tommy curiously followed the voice's instructions to crawl through the caves at the bottom. The Farlands man, who had seen Tommy approaching from a distance, didn't expect this and raced down to find him. Meanwhile, guided by the voice that grew stronger in his mind, Tommy maneuvered through the caves as if he knew them by heart. He reached a cavern that contained some minerals that he recognized as redstone, but they'd been mined and laid out in a very intricate pattern. Tommy followed the voice's instructions to destroy it, but before he could lay a finger on the dust, the Farlands man teleported directly in front of him.
No! Please, no!
Tommy ducked under the man's axe, but its second swing killed him instantly. His body fell, and the Farlands man saw that Tommy's last act had been to place TNT next to the redstone. The TNT exploded, destroying the redstone dust pattern, and the spell that bound the Perlin noise to the Farlands man was broken. No longer under his control, the cliffs came tumbling down, crushing the man beneath them. Or at least, that's how the story goes.